The Arena of Veritel. The great coliseum of Veritel stretched toward the crimson sky like a wound carved into the planet's flesh. Thousands of alien spectators filled the obsidian tiers, their claws drumming against metal railings in anticipation. Insectoid nobles clicked their mandibles in excitement while reptilian lords fluttered their wings, each species bringing their own particular brand of cruelty to witness what they considered entertainment. They had not come for justice or honor. They had come to watch something burn. At the heart of the arena, beneath banners woven from the hides of conquered species and adorned with the bones of long-dead rebels, a single human was dragged across the polished black floor. His wrists bore the fresh marks of heavy shackles, and his torn tunic revealed bruises that painted a map of recent suffering across his ribs. The guards shoved him toward the center with the same care one might give to refuse. He stumbled but did not fall, did not beg, did not cry out. To those watching from their gilded boxes, he appeared to be just another condemned prisoner, another piece of Terran flesh to be sacrificed for their amusement. The man had no family left to mourn him. The human colonies had fallen months ago, scattered to the void or ground under the heel of the Galactic Consortium. His name had been stripped from him the day he was captured, leaving only a prisoner number that would die with him in this place. Across the arena floor, two massive cages shook with barely contained fury. Within them, twin nightmares paced and snarled, apex dragons, hybrid creatures born in the ancient forge worlds where biological engineers had perfected the art of breeding terror. These were not mere beasts, they were living weapons, each one worth more than entire star systems. The first dragon was a crimson and black monster whose eyes smoldered like dying suns. Its scales bore scars from countless battles, yet none had diminished its deadly grace. The second stood taller and leaner, its iridescent plating catching the arena lights like oil on water. Glowing runes had been branded across its elongated face, marks of ownership that proclaimed its victories to all who looked upon it. Both creatures were legends across the known galaxy. Both had devoured heroes and champions from a dozen worlds. Today, they would add one more human to their count. This was not meant to be a fair fight or even a contest. It was an execution dressed as ceremony, a final insult to humanity after their crushing defeat in the outer colonies. The message was clear: even in death, humans belonged to their alien masters. High above in the command balcony, High Regent Sakai spread his jeweled wings and rose to address the crowd. His voice, amplified by the arena's acoustic systems, rang out across the vast space like the tolling of a funeral bell. Citizens of the consortium, he called, his words met with thunderous approval. Today we offer the final breath of a dying species to the flames of justice. The crowd roared its approval, but the human in the center of it all remained silent, his eyes fixed on something beyond the spectacle surrounding him. The moment of release. The arena floor rumbled as ancient mechanisms stirred to life. Steam hissed from hydraulic systems that had claimed countless lives, and the massive cage doors began their slow, deliberate ascent. Chains rattled overhead as the restraining systems prepared to release two of the galaxy's most feared predators. The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch as the first dragon stepped forward, its claws scraping against the obsidian floor with sounds like grinding stone. A low growl emanated from its throat, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very marrow of every being present. The second dragon emerged in terrifying silence, its movement fluid and predatory, somehow more frightening than any roar. The human prisoner stood motionless in the center of the arena, thin and ragged from months of captivity. His clothes hung loose on his malnourished frame, and his face bore the hollow look of a man who had seen too much suffering. Yet there was something in his eyes, not fear, not desperation, but a strange kind of patience, as if he were waiting for something the crowd could not see. As the dragons approached from opposite sides, their massive forms casting long shadows across the arena floor, the man did something unexpected. He exhaled, not a whimper or sob, but a slow, deliberate breath through cracked lips. Then he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a sound that existed beyond the roar of the crowd and the scraping of claws on stone. The dragons stopped. Their movement, which had been fluid and purposeful, suddenly became hesitant. Fire built in their throats as they had been trained, but their eyes showed something the handlers had never seen before: confusion. In all their battles, through all their victories, the dragons had never paused to consider their prey. They consumed, they destroyed, they moved on. That was the law of the pit. But now they stood frozen, their massive heads tilted as if trying to remember something long forgotten. Up in the spectator boxes, a few of the more observant aliens began to murmur. A diplomat from the Jerome Confederacy leaned forward in his seat, his compound eyes reflecting the arena lights as he whispered to his aide, "Something's wrong. Dragons don't hesitate." In the handlers section, technicians frantically checked their control systems. The shock collars around the dragons' necks showed green lights, fully functional. The neural dampeners were operating within normal parameters. Yet the beasts stood motionless, their attention fixed entirely on the frail human before them. The man whispered a single word. It was spoken so softly that even the most sensitive audio pickups in the arena failed to catch it clearly. No translator in the consortium's vast databases could identify its origin. The linguistic AIs that monitored all arena communications found no match in their extensive libraries of galactic languages. But the dragons understood. Their flames, which had been building to an inferno, extinguished mid-growl. The taller dragon lowered its massive head a fraction of an inch. The crimson one shifted its weight, its scarred frame tilting as if in recognition of something it had thought lost forever. A hush fell over the arena like a storm suddenly cut short, leaving only the whisper of wind through the upper tiers and the distant hum of the facility's life support systems. The awakening. The silence that had fallen over the arena was not empty, it was pregnant with possibility, heavy with the weight of something ancient stirring to life. The human took a single step forward, and though the ground did not tremble, though the sky did not darken, every being present felt the shift in the very fabric of reality around them. Gasps rippled through the crowd like cracks spreading through crystal. This was beyond spectacle, beyond anything they had come to witness. The dragons, those undefeated, uncontrollable legends of war, stood motionless not from paralysis or injury, but from something far more profound. They were waiting. The crimson dragon let out a deep, trembling sound that was not quite a growl. It resonated through the arena like the echo of distant thunder, but it carried no threat, no fury. Instead, it held recognition, as if the beast were remembering a dream it had thought lost forever. The human approached slowly, dust swirling around his bare feet with each measured step. His shoulders were hunched from years of labor and malnourishment, his frame diminished by captivity, yet something in his bearing had fundamentally changed. His gaze, once hollow with defeat, now burned with an intensity that seemed to reach back through eons of forgotten history. He did not speak again. Instead, he simply raised his hands, not in defense, not in supplication, but in remembrance. The gesture was ancient, primal, carrying the weight of bonds forged before the stars themselves had learned to burn. In response, the glowing runes branded across the dragons' faces began to flicker and pulse with soft, warm light. In the command box high above, High Regent Sakai rose to his feet, his ornate plumage bristling with disbelief and rage. "Why aren't they killing him?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "Activate the shock collars. Engage the neural suppressors." The technicians scrambled to comply, their clawed hands flying over control panels that had never failed before. But as they pressed activation sequences and emergency overrides, something impossible began to happen. Interface screens flickered and sparked. Control systems that had been built with the finest technology in the galaxy suddenly began to fail, one by one. Heat sensors exploded in showers of sparks. Power conduits screamed in electronic protest before going dark. The suppression fields that had kept the dragons manageable for years simply stopped. The backup systems failed before they could even activate. Emergency protocols defaulted to safe mode and then crashed entirely. Most impossibly of all, the dragon's restraint collars, technological marvels that no rebel world had ever managed to break, began to glow red, then white, then simply disappeared. Not shattered, not burned away, but erased as if they had never existed at all. The human placed his palm against the chest of the crimson dragon, just above where its twin hearts beat like war drums. There was no force in the gesture, no command or compulsion. There was only contact, skin against scale, and with that touch came release. The dragon shuddered, not from pain, but from a freedom it had forgotten was possible. 1,000 memories surged through its consciousness at once, battles fought beneath forgotten suns, ancient alliances sealed in fire and blood, sacred ceremonies where human and dragon were one spirit sharing two forms. The memory of him, not this broken body, not this scarred flesh, but the eternal essence that had once ridden on dragonback when the galaxy had been young and such partnerships were legend rather than impossibility. Slowly, with a grace that defied its massive size, the crimson dragon stepped aside. Not in obedience, in reverence. The crowd, which moments before had been a riotous mob thirsting for blood, fell into complete silence. In that quiet, you could hear the wind curl through the upper reaches of the coliseum. You could hear guards unsheathing weapons they no longer trusted to be sufficient. You could hear, even from the highest tiers, the distant echo of that whispered word now being repeated by the dragons themselves like a prayer in a language older than empires. The human turned then, slowly and deliberately, to face the emperor's balcony. The chains still wrapped his wrists like iron vines, but his presence had undergone a transformation that no cage could contain. He no longer stood like prey awaiting execution. He stood like the storm that comes before the first fire. Like something born from the spaces between stars, awakened at last after a sleep that had lasted lifetimes. The revelation. The transformation was complete now, visible to even the most obtuse observers in the arena's highest reaches. The man who had been dragged in as a condemned prisoner no longer existed. In his place stood something that made the ancient dragons bow their massive heads in recognition, not submission, but acknowledgement of what he truly was. High Regent Sakai's voice cracked as he screamed orders that his subordinates could no longer obey. Kill him. Release the backup dragons. Activate the arena's defensive systems. But every technological marvel of the consortium's military might have become useless, their circuits fried by forces beyond their understanding. The second dragon, the tall one with iridescent scales, approached the human with steps that shook the arena floor. But when it reached him, it did something that sent waves of terror through the alien spectators. It knelt. A creature that had never known defeat, that had torn apart entire battalions of the galaxy's finest warriors, lowered itself before a man still wearing prisoner's chains. The gesture was unmistakable in its meaning, and that meaning sent panic rippling through the crowd like wildfire. The human reached up and placed his other hand on the kneeling dragon's snout. At his touch, the branded runes across its face began to shift and change, transforming from symbols of ownership into something far older, markings that spoke of partnership, of mutual respect, of bonds that transcended the crude concept of master and slave. Impossible, whispered a consortium admiral from his viewing box. The dragons were created in our forge worlds. They were bred to serve us. They cannot remember what never existed. But they did remember. In their ancient genetic memory, deeper than any conditioning the consortium had imposed, lay the truth that their creators had tried to erase. They remembered when humans and dragons had been allies, when together they had ruled the spaces between worlds, when their bond had been strong enough to shake the foundations of reality itself. The human spoke again, and this time his voice carried across the arena without need of amplification. The word he had whispered before now rang out clear and strong, and every being present heard it in their own language, understood it in their own way. It was a name, not his name, but the name of what he represented. Dragon Lord. The title hung in the air like a physical presence, and suddenly everything made terrible sense to those who had thought themselves masters of the galaxy. The humans had not been conquered because they were weak. They had been conquered because they had forgotten who they were, had turned away from the ancient pacts that had once made them feared across all known space. But forgetting was not the same as losing. And now, in this moment, in this place built for their humiliation, that ancient power had awakened. The dragons spread their wings wide, a gesture that was part display and part protection, sheltering the human between them as they had done in ages past. The crowd began to panic in earnest now, alien nobles pushing and clawing at each other in their haste to reach the exits. They had come expecting to witness an execution and instead found themselves facing the return of something their ancestors had crossed the void to escape. High Regent Sakai, his composure finally shattered completely, drew his ceremonial plasma sword and leveled it at the human below. "I don't care what you think you are," he shrieked. "You're still just flesh and blood, and flesh can burn." The human looked up at him and smiled, not with cruelty or hatred, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had already won a victory that his enemies were only beginning to understand. "Yes," he said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the arena. "Flesh can burn. But what happens when fire recognizes its master?" The dragons lifted their heads toward the command balcony, and their eyes began to glow with the same ancient light that had erased their bonds. In that moment, High Regent Sakai realized with crystal clarity that he had made a terrible mistake. He had not captured a prisoner of war. He had awakened something that should have remained sleeping. The reckoning. The arena erupted into chaos as the dragon's roars shook the very foundations of the coliseum. But these were not sounds of rage or mindless destruction, they were calls of liberation, announcing to the galaxy that the ancient compact had been renewed. The humans stood between them, no longer a prisoner but a catalyst for something that would reshape the balance of power across the stars. High Regent Sakai's plasma sword trembled in his grip as he watched his perfect execution transform into his own nightmare. Around him, his guards were abandoning their posts, their survival instincts finally overriding their loyalty to the consortium. The technology they had trusted to make them gods had proven worthless against forces that predated their civilization by millennia. The human looked up at the command balcony one final time, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of prophecy. "You sought to make us extinct," he said, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast arena despite the chaos. "But extinction was never our fate. It was our chrysalis." He raised his chained hands toward the dragons, and the metal simply fell away, not cut or broken but transformed into dust that scattered on the wind. The dragons spread their wings wider, creating a canopy of scale and membrane that cast the arena floor into shadow. In that darkness, something miraculous began to happen. Light began to emanate from the human skin, not harsh or blinding, but warm and golden like the first dawn after endless night. The dragon's eyes reflected that light, amplifying it, sending it cascading across the arena in waves that seemed to awaken something dormant in every living being present. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds where humans lived in slavery or hiding, that same light flickered to life. In the depths of asteroid mining stations, in the holds of prison ships, in the forgotten corners of alien cities, humans began to remember. They remembered what they had been before the consortium's conquest, before they had allowed themselves to believe they were nothing more than another conquered species. They remembered the dragons. On the forge worlds where the consortium had bred their weapons of war, every dragon in captivity lifted its head and roared in unison. Restraint systems that had held for decades simply ceased to function. Guards who had thought themselves safe behind energy barriers discovered that some bonds transcend technology. The partnership between human and dragon, written into the genetic memory of both species, could not be suppressed forever. Back in the arena, High Regent Sakai made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his authority. He activated his personal shields and raised his weapon, channeling enough energy to level a city block. "Die, you primitive." His words were cut short as one of the dragons, the iridescent one with the transformed runes, opened its mouth and breathed. But what emerged was not fire as the consortium understood it. This was the flame of creation itself, the same force that had lit the first stars and would burn long after the last world went cold. It washed over the command balcony not as destruction but as transformation, rewriting the very atoms of Sakai's weapons and armor, turning them into harmless light that dissipated into the afternoon sky. The regent himself was untouched by the flame, but his arrogance burned away like morning mist. He collapsed to his knees, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had unleashed. The humans had not been conquered, they had been sleeping. And now they were awake. The human, no, the Dragon Lord, walked slowly toward the arena's main exit, his dragon companions flanking him like living storms. Behind them, the coliseum began to transform. The obsidian walls, carved from the bones of dead worlds, started to crack and crumble, revealing something beautiful underneath, white stone that gleamed like starlight, structures that belonged to a more ancient and noble age. As they reached the threshold, the Dragon Lord paused and turned back one final time. His voice, when he spoke, was heard not just in the arena but on every world where the consortium held sway, carried by the same mysterious force that had shattered their technology. "The age of chains is ending," he said. "Tell your masters that humanity remembers its true nature. Tell them that the dragons have returned to us, and we to them. Tell them that what they thought was an ending was merely a new beginning." He stepped through the archway, his dragons beside him, and as they passed from the arena into the world beyond, something fundamental shifted in the galaxy's power structure. The consortium's greatest weapons had become humanity's greatest allies. The execution meant to demonstrate their dominance had instead announced their downfall. In the years that followed, historians would debate what had really happened in the arena that day. Some claimed it was advanced technology masquerading as ancient magic. Others insisted it was proof that some bonds transcend science and reason. But those who had been there, who had witnessed the moment when Dragon recognized Dragon Lord, never doubted what they had seen. The partnership between human and dragon was real, and it was eternal. The consortium had awakened something they could not comprehend, much less control. And in trying to extinguish the last light of humanity, they had instead ignited a flame that would burn across the galaxy, freeing every world that had bent the knee to their tyranny. The prisoner they had thrown to the dragons had been nobody special, just another broken human in a universe full of them. But the being who had walked out of that arena was something far more dangerous, hope made manifest, proof that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come. The end.